The Young and the Restless spoilers recap, the 25th of March 2026 Wednesday. The silence in the grand living room of the Newman Ranch was not merely an absence of sound, it was a heavy, suffocating entity. Nikki Newman stood by the towering stone fireplace, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the edge of the mantel so tightly her knuckles blanched white. Above her, the imposing portrait of Victor Newman seemed to sneer down his painted eyes, radiating the same cold, unyielding arrogance that had just shattered her reality in his physical presence. Minutes earlier, Victor had delivered his final cruel dismissal. His words had been sharp, precise, and devoid of any lingering warmth from their decades-long tumultuous romance. He had spurned her, tossing her aside, with a callousness that left her gasping for air. For years, Nikki had endured Victor's Machiavellian maneuvers, his secrets, and his collateral damage, always believing that beneath the ruthless exterior of the Black Knight lay a heart that belonged exclusively to her. Today, that illusion had been violently ripped away. The emotional wound was profound, bleeding into a deep, agonizing sorrow that quickly began to curdle into something far more dangerous, pure, unadulterated rage. She could no longer endure his cruelty. The threshold of her tolerance had been breached, and as she stared into the cold fireplace, a spark of vengeance ignited within her soul. Nikki turned away from the portrait, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. If Victor believed he could cast her aside without consequence, he had vastly underestimated the woman he had molded into a survivor. She knew where the bodies were buried. More importantly, she knew about his latest, most abhorrent scheme, the staged kidnapping. It was a masterclass in psychological torture, an orchestrated nightmare designed to bend his rivals to his will and test the loyalty of those around him. Innocent people had suffered. Lives had been upended. And Victor had sat in his leather chair, pulling the strings like a malevolent puppeteer. Nikki decided in that crystallizing moment that the darkness of Victor's empire could no longer remain hidden. She was going to drag his dark truths into the unforgiving light of day, and she knew exactly who the perfect catalyst for his destruction would be. Across town, the atmosphere at the Genoa City Athletic Club was muted, filled with the low hum of clinking silverware and hushed conversations. Kane Ashby sat alone at a corner table, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. The lines on his handsome face were etched deep with a profound, exhausting sorrow. His thoughts were consumed entirely by Lily. Their relationship had always been a tapestry of intense love and devastating heartbreak, but lately a chasm of unspoken tension had widened between them. Kane felt as though he were losing her to a world he didn't understand, sensing a shadow over her that she refused to explain. He stared blindly at the condensation forming on the water glass in front of him, lost in the labyrinth of his own despair. Kane. The voice was elegant, laced with a steely resolve that snapped him out of his reverie. He looked up to see Nikki Newman standing over his table. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored emerald suit, but her blue eyes held a storm that immediately put him on edge. Nikki Kane replied, his voice rough. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. To what do I owe the pleasure? If this is about Newman business, I'm really not in the mood. Nikki sat down gracefully, crossing her legs and folding her hands on the table. This isn't about business, Kane. Not in the traditional sense. It's about survival. And it's about the truth, something you have been desperately deprived of lately. Kane's brow furrowed. He sat up straighter, the lethargy of his heartbreak momentarily forgotten. What are you talking about? I know you've been agonizing over Lily. Nikki began, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial register. I know you can feel the distance between you, the secret she's keeping. You think it's just the usual marital strain, the pressures of her career. But it's a symptom of a much darker disease. Kane's jaw tightened. I don't need you analyzing my marriage, Nikki. If you have something to say, say it. Nikki leaned in her eyes, locking onto his with an intensity that made his blood run cold. The kidnapping, Kane. The one that threw this entire city into chaos. The one that traumatized so many and nearly destroyed lives. She paused, letting the weight of the event hang in the air between them. It was staged. Every single second of it was a theatrical production orchestrated by my husband. Victor masterminded the entire thing. Kane stared at her, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the claim. Victor staged a kidnapping. Why? That's insane even for him. Because it served his agenda, Nikki replied bitterly. Because Victor Newman views people as chess pieces and he needed to clear the board. But that isn't the tragedy I came here to share with you, Kane. The tragedy is who helped him do it. A cold dread began to pool in the pit of Kane's stomach. The air in his lungs suddenly felt too thick to exhale. What do you mean? Nikki's expression softened with a fleeting moment of genuine pity, but her resolve did not waver. Lily knew Kane. Lily was an accomplice. She helped Victor facilitate the entire charade. She watched you suffer, watched this city panic, and she held the secret to protect Victor's empire. No, Kane, whispered the word, escaping him like a dying breath. He shook his head, pushing back from the table. No, you're lying. You're trying to get back at Victor for whatever fight you two are having, and you're using my wife to do it. Lily would never, she wouldn't be capable of something so twisted. Search your feelings, Kane, Nikki urged her voice, steady and relentless. Think about her absences. Think about the hushed phone calls, the sudden infusions of capital into her projects, the way she couldn't look you in the eye when the victims were mentioned. I am not lying to you. I am handing you the key to your own reality. Kane's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The puzzle pieces, the ones he had desperately tried to ignore, suddenly slammed together to form a horrifying, grotesque picture. The late nights at the office, the unexplained meetings at the Newman Tower. The guilt that seemed to radiate from Lily's very pores whenever he tried to comfort her about the city's ongoing crisis. His denial crumbled, leaving behind a devastation so profound it physically ached. His trust, the foundational bedrock of his love for Lily, shattered into a million irreparable fragments. Without another word to Nikki, Kane threw a crumpled bill onto the table and stormed out of the athletic club. The drive to the Chancellor Winter's offices was a blur. The streets of Genoa City whipped past him, a meaningless smear of colors and lights. His mind was a chaotic vortex of grief, betrayal, and a rapidly boiling anger. How could the woman he loved, the mother of his children, align herself with the devil himself in a plot so inherently cruel? He bypassed the receptionist with a dark, terrifying glare that stopped her protest in her throat. He threw open the heavy glass doors to Lily's executive office. She was seated behind her desk, elegant and poised, reviewing a stack of contracts. At the sound of the door slamming shut, she looked up, a welcoming smile instantly faltering at the sight of his thunderous expression. Kane, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost, Lily said, standing up, her voice laced with sudden concern. Kane crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't yell. Instead, his voice was deadly quiet, vibrating with a suppressed fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. When were you going to tell me? Lily blinked, taking a step back. Tell you what, Kane, you're scaring me. What is going on? The kidnapping, Lily, he said, watching her face closely. He saw the microscopic flinch, the sudden dilation of her pupils, the way her breath hitched. It was all the confirmation he needed. The final nail in the coffin of their trust. Nikki told me everything. Victor staged it. And you, my God, Lily, you helped him. Lily's face drained of all color. She reached out to grip the edge of her desk for support, her knees seemingly giving way. Kane, please let me explain. Explain. Kane erupted, the quiet fury suddenly exploding into a roar that echoed off the glass walls of the office. Explain how you became an accomplice to a terror plot. Explain how you watched people I care about people we know suffer through the agony of not knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead, while you sat here and played God with Victor. Newman. Tears spilled over Lily's eyelashes, tracking through her flawless makeup. She held up her hands, trembling violently. You don't understand the pressure he put on me. Victor backed me into a corner. He threatened the company, he threatened our family's legacy. He told me it was a necessary evil to root out a greater threat. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, Kane. I swear to you, I tried to mitigate the damage. Mitigate the damage. Kane scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound that held no humor. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a monster wearing his wife's face. You don't get to play the victim here, Lily. You made a choice. You chose power. You chose Victor's approval over basic human decency. You chose to lie to my face day after day while I held you in our bed and told you everything was going to be all right. I was trying to protect you, Lily sobbed, stepping toward him, reaching out to touch his arm. Kane recoiled violently, snatching his arm away as if her touch were acidic. Don't touch me. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. You were protecting your position. He backed away toward the door, his chest heaving. The disappointment in his eyes was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that snuffed out the last embers of his affection. I look at you right now and I don't even know who you are. The Lily, I love the woman with integrity and a conscience, and she's gone. Maybe she never existed at all. Kane, please don't say that. Please, we can fix this. Lily begged, her voice breaking into a wail as she watched him reach for the door handle. There is no fixing this, Kane said, his voice dropping back to a hollow whisper. You sold your soul to Victor Newman, and I'm not going to stick around to watch you pay the price. Kane walked out, leaving Lily collapsing into her chair, her sobs echoing in the empty office. But Kane's momentum was far from spent. The betrayal of his wife was a gaping wound, but the architect of that betrayal, the puppet master who had dragged his family into the mud, was sitting in a tower just blocks away. The indignation that filled Kane's veins was a toxic burning fuel. He wasn't just a heartbroken husband anymore. He was a man who had been pushed past the point of no return. He drove to the Newman Enterprises building with reckless speed, the tires of his car squealing as he pulled into the executive parking garage. He marched into the grand lobby, his face set in stone. Security guards recognized him and hesitated, unsure whether to intercept the former executive. Kane didn't give them the chance. He stepped into the private elevator and swiped a legacy access card he still carried, hitting the button for the top floor. The doors slid open to the executive suite. Victor Newman's assistant stood up alarmed. "Mr. Ashby, you can't be up here. Mr. Newman is in a private..." Kane ignored her, striding directly to the heavy mahogany doors of the CEO's office and throwing them open with enough force to make them bounce off the walls. Victor Newman sat behind his massive desk, a gold pen suspended over a document. He looked up, his legendary mustache twitching slightly in annoyance, though his dark eyes remained impassive. "Well, to what do I owe this dramatic intrusion, Kane? Have you forgotten basic manners, or did you simply lose your way to the lobby?" Kane slammed the door shut behind him and walked slowly toward the desk, planting his hands firmly on the polished wood and leaning over it, bringing his face inches from Victor's. "I know about the kidnapping, Victor. I know you staged the whole damn thing." For a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise crossed Victor's face, but it was instantly replaced by an infuriating, condescending smirk. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, but I suggest you lower your voice and remove yourself from my office before I have security remove you." "Call them," Kane challenged, his voice dripping with venom. "Call security. Have them drag me out. It'll make a great photo op for the Genoa City Chronicle when I tell them exactly what the great Victor Newman has been up to. When I tell them how you terrorized this city for your own sick amusement." Victor leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He studied Kane with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator assessing a wounded animal. "You are hysterical, Kane, and you are making baseless accusations. Accusations that border on slander. You have no proof of these ridiculous claims." "I don't need a signed confession," Victor Kane spat. "I have a witness. I have an accomplice. Lily told me everything." Victor's eyes narrowed, the temperature in the room plummeting. The mention of Lily's confession was a variable he had not anticipated. Lily is a confused young woman under a great deal of stress. "No one will believe a word of this." "They will when I take it to the board," Kane countered, standing tall, his indignation making him feel 10 feet tall. "They will when I take it to the SEC, to the police, to every rival you have ever crushed. You thought you could use my wife. You thought you could pull her into your darkness and I would just sit by and play the dutiful, oblivious husband. You destroyed my marriage today, Victor. You broke the woman I love. And in return, I am going to break your company." Victor stood up slowly, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the office. "You listen to me, you ungrateful punk." Victor growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that had terrified men far more powerful than Kane Ashby. "You do not come into my office and threaten me. You do not threaten my company. If you breathe a word of this absurd fantasy to the press, I will crush you. I will ensure you never work in this industry, in this town, or in this state ever again. I will bury you so deep you won't even see daylight. I have nothing left to lose," Kane roared back, slamming his fist onto the desk. "You already took my family. What else can you possibly do to me? You think your threats mean anything to a man who has just watched his entire life burn to the ground. You overplayed your hand, old man. You thought you were invincible, but you're just a paranoid tyrant who leaves a trail of destruction wherever he goes." Kane backed away from the desk, pointing a trembling finger at the Newman patriarch. "This is war, Victor, an open public war. I am going to tear Newman Enterprises down brick by brick, and I am going to start by exposing you for the fraud and the criminal that you are. Enjoy your view from the top, Victor, because the fall is going to kill you." Kane turned on his heel and stormed out of the office, leaving the door wide open behind him. Victor remained standing behind his desk, his chest rising and falling with heavy, controlled breaths. The silence returned to the office, but it was no longer the silence of absolute power. It was the silence of a looming catastrophe. Kane Ashby was a man unmoored, driven by grief and a thirst for vengeance, making him the most dangerous kind of enemy. The confrontation had sent a seismic shockwave through the very foundation of Newman Enterprises. If Kane followed through on his threat and the burning conviction in his eyes suggested he absolutely would, the resulting scandal would not just be a public relations nightmare. It would be an extinction-level event. The revelation of a staged kidnapping orchestrated by the CEO would invite federal investigations, trigger a mass exodus of investors, and give rival corporations the ammunition they needed to launch hostile takeovers. Victor slowly sank back into his chair, his mind racing through contingencies, damage control, and retaliatory strikes. But for the first time in a very long time, the Black Knight felt a cold trickle of genuine vulnerability. The walls of his empire were trembling. The business world of Genoa City was on the precipice of an all-out war, a bloody, ruthless conflict that threatened to consume them all. And it had all been ignited by a spurned wife's revenge, a shattered husband's fury, and a truth too dark to remain buried. Newman Enterprises stood on the edge of the abyss, and as Victor stared out at the sprawling city skyline, he knew that the battle for his legacy had only just begun. The silence in Noah Newman's Genoa City apartment was absolute, yet it was the loudest thing in the room. It was a suffocating, heavy presence that pressed against the walls and choked the air from his lungs. Across the expansive living room, standing rigidly by the floor-to-ceiling windows, was Audra Charles. The gray light of a looming Wisconsin storm cast long, harsh shadows across her usually flawless features. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a defensive posture she had adopted like a second skin ever since the reality of their shared tragedy had finally caught up to them. They were drowning. The loss of their unborn child, a secret that had festered in the dark corners of their London past and had now erupted into the present, was a phantom that haunted their every waking moment. For weeks, they had been circling each other in this toxic dance of grief. Instead of leaning on one another, they had turned their pain outward, using their words as daggers to keep the vulnerability at bay. Noah stared at the back of her head, his jaw tight. He remembered the anger he had felt when he first found out the betrayal of her running away, but all of that had burned away, leaving only a hollow, echoing ache. He took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste doing nothing to ground him. "You don't have to stay here, Audra," Noah said, his voice raspy, devoid of the warmth that used to define it. "If being in the same room as me is this unbearable, the door is right there." Audra didn't turn around. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman on the edge of shattering. "I'm not staying for you, Noah," she replied, her tone clipped sharp as broken glass. "I'm staying because if I go back to the athletic club, I'll have to pretend I'm fine. I'll have to put on the Audra Charles armor and smile at people who mean nothing to me. Here, at least here, I can be miserable in peace." Miserable Noah scoffed softly, setting the mug down on the glass coffee table with a sharp clink. "Is that what we are? Just two miserable people taking turns punishing each other for something neither of us could control." "You punished me the moment you looked at me with that absolute disgust in your eyes," Audra fired back, finally spinning around to face him. Her dark eyes were blazing with unshed tears, her composure cracking. "You thought I made it up, Noah. You thought I used the death of our baby as an excuse." Noah flinched as if she had struck him. "I didn't know the truth then. I was hurt. But now we both know the truth, and we're still standing on opposite sides of a canyon waiting for the other to fall in." He ran a hand through his dark hair, the weight of the world pressing into his shoulders. The loss was a living, breathing entity in the room, gnawing at the frayed edges of their sanity, driving them further and further apart. Audra turned away, unable to bear the raw agony in his gaze. She walked over to the sleek mahogany console table where her designer tote bag sat. "I should go. This was a mistake. Coming here to talk about the Newman media deal, pretending we could be professionals, it was a stupid idea." She grabbed her bag, but in her haste, her hand caught the edge of a small, faded velvet pouch that had been tucked inside the side pocket. The pouch tumbled to the hardwood floor. The drawstring loosened, and a tiny object spilled out, rolling to a stop just inches from Noah's boots. The room plunged into a sudden, breathless stillness. Noah looked down, his breath hitched in his throat, his heart stopping in his chest. It was a silver rattle. A tiny antique silver rattle with a delicate handle shaped like a sleeping bear. The memory hit him with the force of a freight train. London, a rainy Tuesday afternoon in a small antique shop in Notting Hill. They had been laughing drunk on the intoxicating thrill of their new romance and the terrifying, beautiful secret that Audra was carrying his child. He had bought it on a whim, pressing it into her hands and kissing her forehead, promising her that their baby would have the world. Audra froze her eyes, locked on the silver rattle gleaming against the dark wood floor. A quiet, strangled sob tore from her throat. She dropped to her knees, her trembling hands hovering over the tiny object as if it were made of fire. "You kept it," Noah whispered, his voice breaking completely. He slowly sank to his knees across from her, his eyes never leaving the rattle. "All this time, through everything, you kept it." "I couldn't throw it away." Audra sobbed, the Ice Queen facade melting away entirely, leaving behind a broken, grieving mother. "It was the only thing I had left, the only proof that for a brief shining moment we were going to be a family." The dam broke. The walls they had meticulously built to keep each other out crumbled into dust. Noah reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as they both touched the cold silver. "I'm so sorry." Noah choked out tears, finally spilling over his lashes, tracking down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there, Audra. I'm sorry you had to go through that nightmare alone. I should have protected you. I should have protected our baby." Audra looked up at him, her face wet with tears, her chest heaving with the force of her sobs. "I was so scared, Noah. The pain, the blood. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had failed you. I felt like my body had failed the one beautiful thing we created. So I ran. I ran because I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes." "I would never have been disappointed in you," Noah said, fiercely closing the distance between them. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "Never. I loved you. I loved our baby." Audra buried her face in his neck, her hands clutching the fabric of his shirt as if he were the only solid thing left in the universe. She wailed a deep guttural sound of pure heartbreak that had been trapped inside her for years. Noah held her tighter, rocking her back and forth on the floor of his apartment, his own tears soaking into her dark hair. Instead of driving them apart, the visceral reality of the silver rattle, the tangible proof of their shared loss, became the anchor that tethered them together. The shared pain, once a weapon they used to inflict wounds, suddenly transformed into a bridge. For the first time since London, they were truly seeing each other. They weren't Noah Newman, the bitter ex, and Audra Charles, the ruthless corporate climber. They were just a mother and a father mourning the child they never got to hold. They sat there on the floor for hours, the storm raging outside, mirroring the tempest of emotions within. They shared the genuine, ugly, terrifying feelings they had harbored for so long. Audra confessed her crippling feelings of inadequacy, the nightmares that still plagued her sleep. Noah admitted his paralyzing guilt, the way he hated himself for moving on, for dating other women, while a piece of his soul remained buried in a London hospital. They faced the unhealed wounds together, laying them bare in the quiet safety of each other's arms. They found an unexpected, profound comfort in the realization that they were the only two people on Earth who truly understood the depth of this specific, agonizing sorrow. Across town, the atmosphere of the Genoa City Athletic Club was decidedly less cathartic. The low hum of jazz and the clinking of crystal glasses provided a sophisticated backdrop to the wealthy elite of Genoa City. Sitting at a secluded corner booth, nursing a glass of bourbon, was Holden Novak. Holden's dark eyes were narrowed, his jaw set in a rigid line of barely concealed fury. He had been tracking Audra's movements. He knew she had gone to Noah's apartment under the guise of Newman Media Business, but business didn't take 4 hours. Holden pulled out his phone, staring at the unanswered texts he had sent her. Nothing. Complete radio silence.